2 catastrophic earthquake disasters. 2 neighboring South American nations, less than 2 months apart. That is the pattern I want to open with this morning, because while Monday's magnitude 7, 4 earthquake in Colombia is a devastating disaster in its own right, it is also part of something bigger and more troubling unfolding across this specific stretch of the continent right now. Let me walk y'all through exactly what happened in Colombia, why this particular part of the world keeps getting hit this hard, and what the science actually tells us about the tectonic forces driving all of it. Let's start with the earthquake itself, because the raw numbers here are severe by any measure. The quake struck at 7:34 a.m. local time on Monday, August 10th, registering magnitude 7.4, with an epicenter located just 5 kilometers east of San Jose del Palmar, a town in Colombia's Chaco department, roughly 174 miles west of Bogota. The rupture occurred at a depth of approximately 107 kilometers below the surface, a genuinely deep earthquake, and the shaking reached an estimated 34 million people across Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. The U.S. Geological Survey classified this event with an orange alert, the second highest designation on their impact scale, specifically warning of likely significant casualties and widespread structural damage. Now, let me explain the tectonic machinery actually driving this earthquake, because understanding it explains why this region has such a long, brutal history of major seismic events. Colombia sits directly along the Pacific Ring of Fire, positioned atop the boundary where the Nazca Plate, a slab of oceanic crust beneath the eastern Pacific, is subducting, meaning sliding directly beneath the South American plate. This exact tectonic boundary is responsible for producing some of the most powerful earthquakes ever measured anywhere on Earth. Back in 1906, an estimated magnitude 8 earthquakes struck along the Colombia-Ecuador border, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded globally at that time. Further south along this same tectonic system, the catastrophic magnitude 8 earthquake that devastated Chile in 2010 traces back to the exact same broad subduction process. Monday's 7. 4 earthquake belongs to the same tectonic family, even though its magnitude registered considerably smaller than either of those historic monsters. A reminder that this stretch of the Pacific Rim is capable of producing earthquakes across an enormous range of severity, all driven by the same underlying plate collision. Here is where I want y'all to really pay attention, because this is the piece of the story that I think deserves far more coverage than it has gotten. Colombia's earthquake did not occur in isolation this year. Less than 7 weeks before Monday's disaster, on June 24th, twin earthquakes measuring magnitude 7, 2 and magnitude 7. 5 struck neighboring Venezuela, ultimately killing more than 6,000 people and producing more than 1,400 recorded aftershocks in the weeks that followed. I want y'all to sit with that timeline. 2 major earthquake disasters in 2 neighboring countries along the same general stretch of South America's tectonic boundary, separated by less than 2 months. Rescue teams were reportedly still actively working recovery operations in Venezuela when Colombia's earthquake struck on Monday morning. That is not necessarily evidence that one earthquake directly caused or triggered the other, since Venezuela and Colombia sit along somewhat different, though broadly related, tectonic structures. But seismologists studying this region are watching this close timing with real heightened concern, because clusters of major earthquakes across a connected tectonic zone within a short window do sometimes reflect a broader redistribution of stress across the wider plate boundary system. I also want to address a question I suspect a lot of y'all are wondering right now, given how close together these 2 disasters have struck. Can scientists actually predict when or where the next major earthquake along this boundary will occur? The honest, scientifically accurate answer is no, not with any specific precision. Seismology has made genuine, significant progress in understanding long-term earthquake hazard, meaning which regions carry elevated risk based on their tectonic setting and historical earthquake record. But predicting the exact timing, location, and magnitude of a specific future earthquake remains firmly outside current scientific capability, and reputable seismologists are consistently direct about that limitation rather than overstating what the science can actually deliver. What researchers can say is that both Venezuela's and Colombia's recent earthquakes occurred along tectonic structures capable of producing major, damaging events, and that this general region has a long, well-documented history of significant seismic activity stretching back over a century. That combination of established hazard and recent close-together major events is exactly why regional monitoring agencies are maintaining heightened attention right now, even without being able to offer any specific forecast about what comes next. I also want to place this disaster within the broader global context of the Pacific Ring of Fire, because Colombia's earthquake this week is a reminder of just how much seismic and volcanic activity this single tectonic system is responsible for worldwide. The Ring of Fire traces a horseshoe-shaped path around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, running through Chile, Peru, Colombia, Central America, Mexico, the western United States, up through Alaska, and back down through Japan, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Roughly 90% of the world's earthquakes and around 75% of the world's active volcanoes occur somewhere along this single tectonic boundary system, a reflection of just how much of the planet's plate boundary activity gets concentrated into this one enormous, roughly circular zone. Colombia's position along this system, specifically at the boundary where the Nazca Plate subducts beneath South America, places it squarely within one of the most seismically productive stretches of this entire global network, alongside neighboring Ecuador, Peru, and Chile, all of which have their own extensive histories of major, damaging earthquakes tied to this same underlying tectonic process. Let me bring this back to the specific human damage unfolding in Colombia right now, because the scientific context does not diminish the urgency of what is happening on the ground. As of the most recent update from Colombia's public ministry, at least 224 people have died, more than 1,200 have been injured, and more than 3,700 remain reported missing. These figures have climbed steadily since Monday morning, moving from an initial report of around 20 deaths through 111, 132, and 169, to the current count of 224, with officials cautioning that further increases remain likely as search and rescue operations continue. I want to walk you all through the geography of destruction, because this earthquake did not strike a single city, it devastated an entire region simultaneously. Pereira, capital of the Risaralda region and a core city within Colombia's celebrated coffee-growing axis, has suffered particularly severe damage, with at least 60 confirmed deaths according to the Association of Capital Cities. Video geolocated by CNN captured several buildings in the city collapsing during the shaking. Pereira's Maracanã International Airport suffered a partial terminal collapse, and 16 people were trapped for 6 to 8 hours inside the city's mega-cable aerial cable car system before being safely evacuated. Cali, Colombia's third largest city, has reported at least 188 people missing, with at least 20 buildings completely collapsed and roughly 380 more damaged, as search crews and civilian volunteers work together clearing rubble by hand. Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia have all reported significant destruction as well, with the broader Risaralda region recording at least 40 confirmed deaths on its own. I want to explain why Armenia's inclusion in this disaster carries such heavy scientific and historical significance, because it offers a direct, sobering case study in regional seismic vulnerability. In 1999, a magnitude 6. 2. Earthquake struck near Armenia, in this exact same coffee-growing region, now affected by Monday's quake, killing more than 1,185 people. That 1999 event was both shallower and dramatically weaker in magnitude than this week's 7. 4 earthquake, and it still produced a horrifying death toll. Seismologists studying regional building vulnerability have long pointed to this specific stretch of Colombia's Andean foothills as an area where geology and construction practices intersect in a particularly dangerous way. The region's soil composition in many valley areas tends to amplify shaking intensity compared to more solid bedrock nearby, a phenomenon seismologists call site amplification, and that amplified shaking interacting with a building stock that, in many cases, predates the country's more recent seismic code upgrades, helps explain why this specific region has now suffered 2 devastating, high-casualty earthquakes within a single generation. Let me walk y'all through Colombia's emergency response, because the scale of the mobilization reflects the scientific reality that this is a multi-city, region-wide catastrophe rather than a single, contained disaster. President Abelardo de la Espriella declared a national disaster within hours of the earthquake, and 5 capital cities across the region currently remain under Colombia's highest disaster classification, Red Alert. At least 21 aftershocks have been recorded since the main shock, a sequence that seismologists consider entirely typical for an earthquake of this magnitude, since larger earthquakes reliably produce longer, more numerous aftershock sequences as the surrounding crust continues adjusting to the sudden release of stress along the fault. That aftershock activity, while scientifically expected, continues to complicate rescue efforts on the ground, forcing crews to repeatedly pause and reassess the stability of already damaged structures. I also want to explain the aviation disruption from a logistics and science perspective, because it reflects genuine, necessary caution rather than bureaucratic delay. Colombia's Civil Aviation Authority suspended operations at 7 airports across the western half of the country, including Pereira, Manizales, Quibdó, Armenia, Cartago, and Buenaventura, specifically so structural engineers can inspect runways and terminal buildings for damage that may not be immediately visible from the surface. Earthquake damage to infrastructure, like airport runways, can include subsurface soil liquefaction, a process where intensely shaken, water-saturated soil temporarily behaves almost like a liquid, potentially destabilizing the ground beneath a runway, even when the surface itself looks intact. Inspecting for exactly this kind of hidden damage takes time, but skipping that inspection risks a far worse outcome, an aircraft accident layered on top of an already catastrophic disaster. Let me put the full scope of physical destruction in scientific perspective. With 86 confirmed building collapses spread across 5 separate major cities, this earthquake produced damage across a genuinely enormous geographic footprint, consistent with both its substantial magnitude and its considerable depth. Since deeper earthquakes, while sometimes producing somewhat less intense shaking directly above the epicenter compared to a shallow quake of the same magnitude, tend to spread strong shaking across a much wider surface area. That broad geographic distribution of damage is exactly why this disaster required Colombia to mount 5 simultaneous large-scale emergency responses, rather than concentrating all available resources on a single hard-hit city. I also want to touch on earthquake early warning technology, because it is directly relevant to why an earthquake originating 107 kilometers beneath the surface gives affected communities essentially no meaningful advance notice before the shaking arrives. Modern earthquake early warning systems, like the Shake Alert system deployed along the U.S. West Coast, work by detecting the earthquake's initial, faster-traveling but less destructive waves, and using that brief head start to broadcast an alert to nearby communities seconds before the slower, more damaging shaking arrives. For a system like this to provide any meaningful warning at all, it depends heavily on the earthquake's depth and the distance between the epicenter and the population centers it is trying to protect. Colombia does maintain its own national seismological monitoring network, but earthquake early warning infrastructure, comparable to systems deployed in Japan, Mexico, or the western United States, requires substantial, sustained investment to build and maintain across a country's most vulnerable regions. And expanding that kind of infrastructure across South America's earthquake-prone nations remains an ongoing, resource-intensive challenge that regional governments and international science organizations continue working on collaboratively. So let me bring this together and give you all the full picture, both the human catastrophe unfolding right now and the broader regional patterns surrounding it. This remains an active, ongoing disaster, with search and rescue operations continuing across Pereira, Cali, Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia, and casualty figures that officials expect to keep climbing in the coming days. It is also the second major deadly earthquake disaster to strike this specific corner of South America within less than 2 months, following June's catastrophic twin earthquakes in Venezuela, a pattern that has seismologists across the region watching the broader tectonic picture with real, heightened attention right now, well beyond the immediate response to Monday's quake alone. If you have family or friends anywhere across the affected region in Colombia, keep attempting to reach them through every available channel, understanding that communications infrastructure across the hardest-hit cities may remain unreliable for some time given the scale of the damage. If you are in a position to help, established international relief organizations already coordinating directly with Colombian authorities remain the most effective channel for getting real support to the people who need it most. I will keep tracking both this immediate disaster and the broader regional seismic pattern closely over the coming days and weeks, because understanding how these events connect matters for anticipating what this part of South America might be facing next. If this breakdown helped you understand both the human toll and the scientific forces behind what Colombia is facing right now, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, and share this video with anybody you know connected to this region. I will keep watching this story for y'all, and I will see y'all in the next one. Stay safe out there.